Hi guys, tonight we journey back to medieval Europe, a land of torchlit lanes, thick-walled cottages, and prayers whispered against the dark. In these villages, as the sun fell below the horizon and shadows stretched long across the earth, families gathered around the glow of a single hearth, bracing for the long night ahead. They did not plunge into sleep all at once, nor did they expect to. Instead, they stepped into a night rhythm as natural to them as breathing one that divided their rest into two distinct parts. A rhythm modern science has only recently begun to understand again. You might be surprised by how different medieval nights were compared to our constant electric haze. For many people, this story may feel as astonishing as it does familiar. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy thoughtful journeys through history. I'd also love to know your location and what time it is where you are, so share that down below. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's story together. As twilight settled over a medieval village, daily rhythms slowed. Livestock were herded back behind rough wooden fences, their bleating mixing with the far-off bell of a chapel tower, marking evening prayer. Women gathered children brushing away the day's grime by the flicker of a rush lamp. Across Europe, from damp English farmsteads to the stone houses of French peasants, the hour of nightfall was more than a boundary of sunlight. It was a sacred threshold between work and rest noise and quiet danger and safety. This transition from day to night carried a sense of ritual. The door was barred, an iron hook dropped across it with a reassuring clunk. The fire was stoked and banked to burn low and steady through the night. Prayers were spoken aloud, sometimes in Latin, phrases half understood, sometimes in local dialects that stretched back generations. These prayers, offered in the wavering lamplight, called for protection from devils, witches, and thieves who might prowl the darkness. Some historians still argue whether these night prayers were sincerely believed to shield households or served more as a comforting habit, but to the people saying them, the difference hardly mattered. Saying the words felt like armor against the long night. Children drowsed first, lulled by the warmth of the hearth and the low voices of their parents. Beds were often shared, crowded with family members or servants layered in rough wool blankets and straw mattresses. As they settled, the smells of the day still clung to them, the iron tang of the smithy, the acrid smoke of cooking the sour trace of animals. Sleep came layered over these scents, a nightly return to the same familiar cocoon. Outside, the world grew profoundly still. In the countryside, the darkness was nearly absolute, broken only by the occasional lamp or a distant star. Modern city dwellers might struggle to imagine such depth of night, a velvet black swallowing sound and light alike. Medieval villagers felt it as a living presence, an unpredictable force that could nurture dreams or breed fears. Inside, however, the household lay safe for the first stretch of slumber. This first sleep usually began a few hours after nightfall, extending toward midnight. It was deep and restorative, a time when bodies released the day's burdens. In these early hours, the household was at its most defenseless, trusting that walls, locks, and perhaps the grace of heaven would keep them secure. Some people reported odd visions or half-waking images during this time, phenomena modern science calls hypnagogic hallucinations. In medieval times, these drifting shapes and sounds were folded into a worldview rich with angels, demons, and spirits. A shimmer at the edge of sleep might be the Virgin's blessing, or a warning from a darker force. And so, nightfall in medieval Europe was never simple. It was a passage lined with ritual, marked by prayers, colored by fears, yet also softened by the gentle promise of sleep. That first descent into darkness carried both peace and unease, a balance that would continue to shape the medieval night for centuries. The hours of first sleep had begun rolling across medieval Europe like a shared breath. From the thatched hamlets of England to the tiled rooftops of the Low Countries, families entered a common rhythm, a few hours of deep, unbroken rest. Inside the cottage, the hearth glowed with a banked fire, throwing long shadows across the rough beams of the ceiling. The steady orange light gave shape to faces softened by sleep, and to small feet tangled under coarse linen sheets. First sleep was not merely an interruption of consciousness. It was to medieval minds a gentle retreat from the world's demands. By the light of rush lamps, villagers had already finished their evening rituals. A final sip of ale, a whispered blessing, and then silence took hold. As the night grew deeper, so too did their rest, their bodies relaxing from the labors of the field or the forge. This first sleep was often considered the most precious. It carried a kind of moral weight, a cleansing power that set the tone for the following day. In church sermons, priests sometimes reminded their flocks that pure sleep was a sign of a clean conscience. Restless nights, they warned, might reveal unconfessed sins or impure thoughts. Some historians still argue whether such moral lessons truly shaped how medieval villagers slept, or merely gave clergy a tool to shame the unrepentant. Yet these teachings took hold, woven into bedtime prayers and whispered confessions before rest. During first sleep, the community fell into a near-perfect hush. Dogs stopped barking, carts stopped rattling, and even the night watchman moved more softly. Medieval people lacking modern street lamps knew well that light and noise could only do so much to protect them. The best security came from staying together and following a known routine. First sleep was part of that routine, as essential to survival as a sharpened blade. Within the cramped walls of a cottage, family members might share one large straw mattress. Wealthier households used feather beds, a precious luxury, whose softness still could not shield from the chill that crept through stone walls in winter. Parents often placed children nearest the hearth, where the heat of the embers offered extra comfort. Adults and elders lay closer to the doors, partly to guard against intruders, and partly from a tradition that taught the strong should defend the weak. As they slept, their dreams carried echoes of the day's worries and hopes. There might be visions of a good harvest of a child safely born, or perhaps a haunting memory of failed crops. Medieval chronicles mention villagers who believed dreams were sent by God, offering warning or reassurance. A dream of water, for instance, might mean a prosperous season ahead. Some dream images were so vivid, people recorded them on scraps of parchment, or repeated them to the local priest the next morning. The first sleep generally lasted 3 to 4 hours, depending on the season. In winter, the darkness was so complete that it sometimes stretched to 5 or 6 hours of rest, before the household naturally stirred. There was no sense of sleep debt, as we discussed today. Medieval folk accepted that a night was divided and that the gap between rests was part of life's rhythm. Occasionally, a household might be awakened during first sleep by an unexpected noise, a roaming bandit, a howling dog, or even a distant church bell announcing a fire. In those tense moments, the family would rouse quickly, grabbing knives or staffs and listening hard for danger. But if all was calm, they would slip back into the safety of their first slumber, trusting that the night had not turned against them. And so, through these first precious hours, the medieval household restored its strength. Bodies ached from tilling heavy soil hands, roughened by wool, and iron minds worn by worry over the next day's bread. Sleep brought healing. Breathing evened out, hearts slowed, and children clutched rag dolls or wooden animals for comfort. The fire, always there at the center, glowed on its coals, waiting to illuminate the waking hours yet to come. As the night moved toward its natural pause, a subtle change began to stir among those who slept. Somewhere in the half-lit dark, an ember shifted, a child rolled over, and a parent's eyes fluttered open. They had reached the time of waking, the moment that separated one sleep from another, a moment as curious as it was essential. As the night crept past its midpoint, the hush of first sleep gave way to a subtle stirring. In households across medieval Europe, eyes opened in the half-dark, and limbs shifted against rough-spun sheets. It was not insomnia nor an accident of a restless mind, but rather a familiar and even expected pause, the waking interval between two sleeps. This midnight waking, lasting perhaps an hour or two, was a normal companion to medieval nights. Scholars and physicians of the period recognized it without alarm. Some even praised it as a natural rhythm, a gift of God to allow prayers or quiet thoughts in the night. Today, sleep scientists call it biphasic, or segmented sleep, but to the people of those centuries, it was simply how night worked. What filled these waking hours? Often a surprising amount. The father of a family might rise to tend the embers of the hearth, adding a fresh log to hold back the chill. The mother could nurse a baby, or check on the older children, making sure no one had kicked off blankets. A boy nearly grown might slip outside to relieve himself, glancing at the stars wheeling above the silent village. Some historians still argue whether these night wakings were shaped mainly by necessity or by spiritual habit, but evidence suggests both played a role. By the glow of a rush lamp, families might chat in low voices discussing the next day's plans, or they could share stories passing down legends to chase away the night's quiet fears. In these hours, the bonds of household and community strengthened in small, unhurried ways. There was time, too, for a bit of intimacy. Medieval law texts mention husbands and wives finding this pause a discreet moment for marital relations, away from the eyes and ears of a crowded house. The second sleep afterward was thought to be even deeper, a kind of contented rest that followed closeness. In some places, villagers used these hours for quiet labor. A weaver might card wool by the faint light, a blacksmith check a blade left cooling in water. Tasks that could be done silently without rousing neighbors fit perfectly into this time. They used the pause to stay ahead of life's unending demands. This midnight interval also held spiritual power. Monks in distant cloisters rose for nocturnal prayer, following the rule of Saint Benedict and other church fathers who saw night vigils as a sacred duty. Ordinary villagers inspired by such monastic patterns might kneel beside their straw beds to whisper personal prayers or recite a psalm. They believed that the world was thinner than that messages could pass more easily between mortal and divine. Some believed the night air itself carried magic. Charms and protective blessings were often performed during this waking pause, using herbs gathered in summer and kept for winter's fears. The threshold between first and second sleep was a borderland not quite dream, not quite day where hopes and dreads could be voiced and sometimes perhaps answered. Modern researchers marvel at how well this all fit the body's natural chemistry. In the hours after deep sleep, the mind was calm, yet alert, balanced between rest and attention. It was an ideal moment for reflection, planning, and even creativity. Medieval people could never have described hormones or circadian rhythms, but they seemed to know the night's middle had gifts to offer. As the hour grew later, the sounds of quiet voices and gentle movement began to fade. A father banked the coals. One last time, mothers settled children again, with comforting murmurs, and a neighbor who had stepped over for a bit of ale made his way home. Slowly, the household folded itself back into the covers, drawing the night around them like a cloak. The second sleep waited, promising deeper rest and a final clearing of the mind before dawn. In this moment of transition, there was no fear that the night had been broken, only a certainty that it had been honored, explored, and made their own. As the hush settled once more, the household eased itself toward the second sleep. The embers carefully tended pulsed in a muted glow, offering enough warmth to hold back the night's bite. Children, now stilled after their brief waking, shifted into deeper positions, pulling wool blankets around them. The parents, having checked locks, animals and dreams, released their final waking thoughts into the silence. Second sleep was prized in medieval Europe. It was seen as more restful, more peaceful, even more spiritually protective than the first. The body, after its pause, slipped back into slumber, with a kind of relief, having cast off the worries of the day and the waking hour. Some historians still argue whether second sleep was genuinely more restorative, or simply felt more reassuring, but medieval accounts speak of its depth and its power. In this second stretch of night, dreams took on a clearer, calmer tone. Whereas first sleep might bring confusion or lingering echoes of daily stress, the second sleep held softer images, a field rich with barley, a loved one smiling, or the comforting face of a patron saint. Many medieval dream interpreters wrote that second sleep dreams were closer to truth, messages granted by heaven rather than illusions. The villagers rarely feared these hours. Even their stories of witches or evil spirits seldom targeted the second sleep. Those fears clung to the dusk or the midnight pause instead. By the time second sleep returned, the household was safe, rituals performed, and any night terrors firmly kept at bay by charms, prayers, or simply the reassurance of community. If danger did strike a fire, a sudden illness, a knock at the door, people would still rise quickly, ready to act. But they believed deeply that the second sleep made them stronger, readier for anything the dawn might bring. In some ways, that conviction was as healing as the sleep itself. As winter nights stretched on, second sleep could last 4 or even 5 hours, carrying the household toward first light. In summer, it might be a shorter spell, but its value remained the same. Peasants and nobles alike found in that second rest a refuge, a time to renew not only muscles and minds, but courage itself. Some households even had small customs around second sleep. In parts of France, parents would place a sprig of rosemary or lavender beside the children's heads, believing it guarded their dreams for the rest of the night. In the German-speaking lands, a bit of iron laid near the bed frame was thought to block bad spirits from disturbing second sleep. These details, small but heartfelt, showed just how precious that final portion of the night truly was. The entire pattern, first, sleep-waking, pause, second sleep, formed a stable backbone for medieval daily life. It gave them the confidence to face long winter's unpredictable harvests and the unlit hours when threats might lurk outside the cottage walls. Dividing the night into these segments turned something frightening into something manageable. It transformed darkness from a single endless void into an ordered, navigable sequence. Modern science, with all its measurements and technical language, has only recently begun to acknowledge what medieval villagers practiced by instinct. Segmented sleep. It turns out is not a disorder, but a pattern closer to the natural cycles of human rest. A reminder that the wisdom of peasants and monks learned through hard winters and flickering fires still has lessons to offer. And so, as dawn approached and the distant rooster began to call second sleep, gently let go of its hold. Children blinked awake, parents stretched sore limbs, and the world around them began to stir. But before the rush of animals, carts, and new worries began again, there was a brief moment of calm, the lingering peace of a night well managed, divided and conquered as only biphasic sleep could do. In the quiet heart of a medieval home, the hearth was more than a source of warmth. It was the pulse of nightly life, a steady beacon that guided the household through both phases of their segmented sleep. Its red gold light, banked low to last the hours, made second sleep possible and gave shape to the waking pause. Around the hearth, generations gathered to share food spin stories and tend to each other, its glow a center of both safety and community. The hearth's role was practical in an age without central heating. A well-managed fire prevented frostbite and illness. Those who slept closest to it, usually the youngest or the frail, had the best chance of surviving the cruel chill. In wealthier homes, a fireplace might be built into the wall with a chimney. But in peasant cottages, the fire pit often remained right on the packed earth, its heat spreading slowly outward. A parent would stir from first sleep to feed the coals, ensuring no one woke shivering. Some historians still argue whether the central hearth was primarily a comfort or a survival necessity, but most agree it was the organizing core of nightly rhythms. Without its light, moving about during the waking interval would have been perilous. Even a short trip to relieve oneself outside was dangerous in pitch-black night. The hearth's faint glow kept feet steady, eyes reassured, and spirits calmer. Beyond its practical heat, the hearth marked a social center. When a household woke between sleeps, they might gather near its embers, share a sip of weak ale, and talk. Secrets were shared, here plans were quietly set, and small disputes sometimes settled, while the world outside slumbered. One could say it was a kind of informal parliament, a place where rank duty and family love mingled in the flickering shadows. That routine, from the first shared meal of the evening to the banking of the coals for second sleep, formed an unspoken script. The hearth keeper, often the mother, carried heavy responsibilities to manage the fire, correctly preserving not just heat, but trust in a home's continuity. Even children learned to tend it with respect, understanding that an unguarded spark could mean ruin. Folk traditions gave the hearth a mystical aspect as well. A sprinkle of salt on the embers might protect the household from witches, while placing iron tools near the fire was thought to repel malicious spirits. Some families placed small carved figures on the hearth's mantle, blessings for the night. The combination of flame prayer and a close-knit group formed a shield against the worst the night could offer. It is no exaggeration to say the hearth was the household's soul. While beds were crammed, hay was prickly, and walls might let in the winter wind, the hearth's warm circle reminded everyone they were not alone. Even a stranger welcomed into the circle of its light became for the night a trusted guest. Medieval chroniclers record how hospitality centered on fire to share your hearth, they wrote, was the truest mark of civilization. As midnight advanced and the night pause drew to its close, the hearth still anchored the transition. Embers glowed just brightly enough to help parents guide children back to their resting spots. A few final embers were pushed together, a soft hiss of water might douse stray sparks, and the world returned to its hush. In that glow, second sleep felt possible, even inevitable. The hearth had done its work binding a household with shared light and shared breath, carrying them from first sleep through their waking hour and safely into the second. Modern people may marvel at these practices, wondering if they were primitive or backward, yet in truth, this harmony between warmth, family, and nightly rhythm was a finely tuned adaptation. It kept communities alive through centuries of harsh weather, poor diets, and constant risk. And it offered a peace that, in its own way, has rarely been surpassed since. As the night stretched between first and second sleep, the medieval household often turned its thoughts inward, drifting through a quiet space where dreams and faith intertwined. In these hours, the line between waking and sleeping blurred, giving rise to powerful interpretations of dreams, omens, and signs. Medieval Europe was a deeply spiritual place, and for many, the pause between sleeps was seen as a time when the veil between the earthly world and the divine grew thin. Dreams in particular carried weight. From village priests to traveling herbalists, people believed that messages from saints, angels, or even darker forces could slip into the mind during slumber. First sleep dreams were thought to be muddled and chaotic, tangled with worries of the day. But dreams in second sleep, especially after the mind had quieted during the waking break, were considered clearer, more trustworthy. Some historians still argue whether this faith in dreams was naive or a sophisticated means of processing fear and hope. Medieval texts, however, leave little doubt that dream interpretation was taken seriously. Manuals from the period listed symbols and their supposed meanings. A fish in a dream might mean abundance, while a falling roof could signal family loss. These interpretations were rarely random. Instead, they connected to the waking concerns of medieval life, whether livestock, childbirth, plague. If a peasant dreamed of water rising too high, he might warn neighbors to store grain on higher ground. If a woman dreamed of fire, she might watch her cooking hearth more carefully in the coming days. In this way, dreams were woven into the daily safety net of village life. The midnight waking offered the perfect moment to share these visions. Families sat up on straw mattresses murmuring about what they had seen. Parents might soothe a child's fear, or an older brother might boast of a heroic dream where he fought off wolves. This ritual of recounting was more than chatter. It was a rehearsal for survival, a check on the community's mood, and a subtle preparation for tomorrow's choices. Some also believed that this was the hour when evil forces were strongest. There are references in local chronicles to night terrors figures who slipped through the cracks of a sleeping mind to plant fears or even sickness. Herbal charms against such spirits were common, woven into small cloth bags and tied near a child's bed. Sprigs of herbs like vervain or rue, gathered under certain moon phases, were said to keep nightmares away. The church also stepped in, framing dreams within Christian teaching. Priests often reminded villagers that the devil too could whisper in dreams. They advised confession after unsettling visions, just in case a dream came from a corrupt or sinful heart. Yet they also admitted that God might send warnings through sleep, and so dreams should not be ignored. This tension between dreams as holy messages or dangerous temptations ran through medieval culture like a slow-moving current never fully resolved. In noble households where literacy was higher, dreams were sometimes written down in small notebooks. Ladies of the manor might record night visions alongside herbal recipes or family events, treating dreams as another part of a well-run household. A few of these dream books survive, with faded ink describing battles, marriages, or travels never lived in waking hours. There was even a social role for dreams. During the night break, neighbors might slip in to visit, exchanging gossip or discussing troubling visions. These brief encounters wove together families and communities, turning the night into a time for empathy and connection. In such a world, to talk of your dreams was not strange. It was as natural as sharing bread at supper. Modern science has found a curious echo of this practice in segmented sleep experiments. People today often report vivid, meaningful dreams if they wake for a short while and then go back to sleep. It seems our brains still carry the pattern that medieval villagers knew so well, waiting in the pause for something deeper to arrive. And so, in these dim hours between sleeps, medieval people found more than rest. They found a mirror for their fears, a prophecy for their hopes, and a precious space to share the inner stories that made them human. As the hush of medieval night wrapped around the villages, another powerful influence shaped the rhythms of biphasic sleep: the church. From its smallest chapels to grand cathedrals, Christian practice quietly intertwined with segmented rest, weaving prayers and ritual into the natural pause between first and second sleep. The monastic tradition in particular played a key role. Since the early medieval centuries, monks and nuns followed strict schedules built around the canonical hours. Vigils or matins, the night office was often prayed after midnight, precisely when most villagers would naturally wake. In monasteries, bells rang through the cold darkness, calling the faithful to rise, chant, and contemplate divine mysteries. Ordinary folk might hear these bells from afar, drifting across fields or echoing through narrow town streets. Even if they did not attend, the sound reinforced the idea that night was divided, that waking in its middle could serve a higher purpose. Some villagers would murmur private prayers when the bells tolled, aligning their small hidden routines with the grandeur of monastic devotion. Some historians still argue whether peasants really absorbed these rhythms from monasteries, or whether monasteries merely formalized a much older natural human sleep pattern. But the interplay is undeniable. The spiritual structure of Christian timekeeping and the organic biphasic sleep of medieval families matched each other perfectly, each supporting the other. In this midnight window, villagers might recite well-known prayers, an Our Father, a Hail Mary, or simpler blessings learned from grandmothers who blended folk wisdom with church teachings. The pause between sleeps became a chance to confess a silent sin, to promise a better tomorrow, to whisper a name of someone far away. The church taught that such humble offerings, spoken when the night felt most profound, might carry extra weight with God. Beyond prayers, there were rituals tied to second sleep. In some regions, a crucifix was placed near the bed after the midnight break, meant to guard the household through the final hours before dawn. Holy water might be sprinkled around the threshold, sealing out demons or witches who prowled under a waning moon. This blending of Christian symbols and older protective magic was typical of medieval Europe, where no boundary was ever completely hard. The clergy also gave advice about night fears. If villagers spoke of nightmares, a local priest might counsel them to recite psalms before returning to bed. Some priests kept jars of blessed herbs, lavender, basil, rosemary, to distribute to parishioners anxious about their dreams. These small acts of pastoral care, offered in candlelit chancels or cramped village confessionals, showed how deeply the church entered the daily sleep patterns of the people. Over time, the church's influence even reached the architecture of night itself. Curfews were set by church bells, marking when townspeople should extinguish candles and settle down for their first sleep. Watchmen patrolled under orders from local priests who reminded them to protect the village during the most vulnerable hours of rest. This coordination between church civic duty and personal sleep became a defining feature of medieval town life. Yet even in these regulated communities, people claimed their own moments of privacy. The quiet conversations, small household blessings, and storytelling around hearths continued alongside the formal prayers. There was room for both, for faith taught from the pulpit, and for faith lived quietly in the pause between sleeps. Modern scholars have come to see this combination as a triumph of adaptation. Instead of forcing villagers to abandon their natural segmented rhythms, the church built its prayer schedule to harmonize with them. Rather than fighting human sleep cycles, it baptized them. In doing so, it gave medieval communities an anchor, a sense that even the unknown hours of night were watched over and made holy. As the second sleep approached once more, families carried with them this sense of quiet confidence that they had spoken their prayers, honored their traditions, and invited peace into their dreams. In the medieval imagination, that was enough to guard the heart until morning. When dawn still lingered far beyond the horizon, the pattern of biphasic sleep quietly revealed one of medieval society's starkest divides, the difference between how peasants and nobles experienced the night. Though both shared the same general rhythm of first sleep-waking pause and second sleep, their conditions and customs around those hours could be strikingly different. For peasants, life was a negotiation with hard work and harsher nature. Their first sleep was usually snatched after dusk in overcrowded cottages with beds made of straw, rough wool, and animal skins. The break between sleeps was often practical, to check on the animals, bank the fire, soothe a crying child, or even slip outside to guard against thieves or wolves. Sleep was survival patched together between duties. By contrast, the nobility lived in stone manor houses with greater privacy, feather mattresses, and more elaborate bedding. Their midnight waking could include leisurely conversation, a bit of sweet wine, or quiet prayer in a private chapel. Household servants kept the fires going, freeing lords and ladies to use the waking pause for personal reflection or romantic encounters. Some historians still argue whether the upper classes had truly better sleep than peasants. While they had comfort, their lives were more burdened by political intrigue, worries about inheritance, and the constant risk of violent rivalry. Peasants, while poorer, might actually have rested more deeply, their bodies exhausted by honest labor. In this way, Biphasic sleep reveals a fascinating medieval paradox. Luxury did not always guarantee peace. Beyond bedding and room size status shaped how night noises were perceived. A peasant might wake between sleeps, listening for rustlers or hungry wolves. A noble behind thick doors and guarded gates feared assassins or betrayal from within. Both classes watched the night carefully, but for different reasons, carrying their separate anxieties into their second rest. There were other divides as well. In peasant homes, everyone slept together, parents, children, maybe a servant or laborer, a communal warmth that doubled as protection. In a noble house, rooms were more divided, but that separation carried its own dangers, making it harder to rouse everyone if fire or attackers came. The collective safety of a single crowded room might have felt more secure in some ways. Dreams and beliefs also differed. Peasant dreams focused on food weather, harvests, and family safety. A noble's dreams might be haunted by politics, inheritance disputes, or fears of exile. When the waking pause arrived, peasants tended to talk over the dreams. Practically, should we slaughter the pig next week? While nobles sometimes turned theirs into elaborate omens, searching for deeper portents in the restless dark. Folk practices blurred these lines in the unexpected ways. Herbs and protective charms crossed class boundaries, found in manor bedrooms as well as cottages. Candles blessed on Candlemas, sprigs of rosemary, a touch of holy water. These small rituals created a common humanity across a society otherwise split by wealth and rank. In that sense, medieval night carried a democratic flavor. Fear and hope respected no titles. Throughout Europe, the architecture of night adapted to both high and low. Peasant cottages might build a central hearth with sleeping benches around it, while a lord's manor set aside guest chambers and small chapels to keep a measure of holiness near the bed. Yet both homes honored the same Biphasic rhythm, trusted the same pause between sleeps, and folded themselves back into second rest with a shared sigh of relief. Modern historians now see how this two-part sleep pattern worked for everyone. It let peasants manage their labor, check their animals, and preserve warmth. It allowed nobles to manage intrigue, reflect, and plan. Biphasic sleep was flexible, tolerant of each family's fears and comforts, creating a kind of nighttime compromise. As the second sleep approached in either stone chamber or smoky hut, the community's greatest hopes reappeared, that dawn would find them safe, that God would guard their souls, and that a new day would begin with just enough peace to go on. As winter wrapped its icy fingers around medieval Europe, Biphasic sleep took on a new urgency. Nights lengthened to terrifying proportions. 16 hours of darkness in the far north was not uncommon, and the challenge of surviving such a stretch required clever adaptation. Dividing sleep into two parts was quite simply practical genius. The first sleep provided crucial recovery from brutal daytime labor. Farm work did not stop in winter. There were tools to mend animals, to feed, firewood to chop. The cold invaded every corner of a peasant's life, leaving their bones aching and their muscles sore. First sleep after sundown became a precious refuge from this hardship, a few hours of true oblivion that knit flesh and spirit back together. The midnight pause then served a vital second function. The household would rise, check on vulnerable livestock, patch up a broken fence, or even just stir the pot of barley gruel kept simmering overnight. This wakeful interval helped guard against catastrophe, frozen pipes, a spark catching straw, predators sniffing at the henhouse. Some historians still argue whether this break was planned or simply inevitable, but its survival benefits were undeniable. In noble homes, winter's harshness was gentler, but not absent. Stone walls could turn as cold as a crypt without a roaring fire, and the threat of illness spread quickly in close quarters. The wealthy, too, split their sleep, though their midnight wakefulness was more often spent checking on servants, reading prayers, or tending to family matters. Some lords used the break to hold small councils with trusted advisors, plotting spring campaigns while the rest of the household slept. Fringe details in medieval chronicles hint at creative uses for the long winter night. In France, villagers gathered between sleeps to share wine warmed with cloves, believing it strengthened the heart against the season's cruelty. In parts of Germany, people performed quiet spinning or knitting, their hands busy to keep away frostbite. The hush of the midnight hour made such tasks gentle, almost meditative. It was also a time for social resilience. Neighbors might slip through the snow to visit one another, sharing stories and warmth by a different hearth. Hospitality, especially in the cold, was more than courtesy, it was survival. To offer a neighbor a place at your fire during that waking hour was an unspoken pact. Tonight we watch the darkness together. Among the faithful winter's second sleep was blessed with special prayers. Parish priests reminded villagers that the dangerous cold made them more vulnerable to devils and spirits, who they feared prowled more freely when snow silenced the land. Holy water sprinkled at the bed's foot, a crucifix laid on a chest, or the recitation of a protective psalm became winter routines as essential as a well-mended cloak. Modern scientists peering back through centuries of anecdote and archaeological trace recognize the sheer wisdom of such winter rhythms. Humans struggle to stay in continuous sleep for 15 or 16 hours of winter dark. Biphasic rest offered a humane, practical solution. When second sleep finally arrived in the depths of night, it often felt like a reward. Having checked the animals, calmed the household, and perhaps even shared a moment of neighborly friendship, villagers returned to their straw mattresses with easier minds. The final hours of rest were the most peaceful, cradled by knowledge that they had survived another night's worst. Through these winter months, biphasic sleep was not just a pattern, it was a lifeline, a quiet rhythm that made endurance possible. And as the roosters slowly called dawn into being, children blinked awake, parents stirred with hope, and a new day began, once more carrying medieval Europe forward in its unbreakable dance with the seasons. As spring advanced across medieval Europe, the nights gradually shortened, but biphasic sleep did not simply vanish with the change in season. Instead, it adapted, flowing naturally with the rhythms of longer daylight and busier days. After months of winter's long dark, the return of earlier dawns and later sunsets shifted how people arranged their sleeping hours, but the two-phase structure still made sense. First sleep in springtime came later, as chores stretched past dusk. Fields needed sowing animals, birthing their young demanded attention, and tools had to be sharpened for the new season. Villagers might gather for longer evenings around the hearth, singing songs or mending clothes by firelight. Only when true night settled in, well past what we would call bedtime today, did they slip into the first deep sleep. The waking pause still arrived, even if shorter than in winter. Mothers might check newborn lambs. Fathers might talk through planting strategies for the coming week. Spring meant hope, but also uncertainty. A hard frost could still strike, or a sudden illness might sweep through young livestock. So this waking moment continued to serve a practical purpose: watchfulness. Some historians still argue whether this spring wakefulness was truly restful or simply a burden, but medieval accounts suggest that people saw it as another chance to prepare. If prayers had been offered in the first part of the night, the break between sleeps became a moment for gratitude, for blessing the new season and asking for gentle weather. Spring's lighter nights also changed dreams. Accounts from household diaries and small religious chronicles note that visions in second sleep became brighter, more hopeful. Dreams of green fields, plentiful wheat, or a healthy calf might appear, echoing the optimism of new growth outside. Dream interpreters from the era sometimes wrote that these second sleep dreams carried a special message of renewal. Fringe customs colored these hours too. In parts of the Low Countries, children were taught to step outside for a moment between sleeps, taking in the scent of blossoming earth as a charm for good luck. In some English villages, women sprinkled flower petals around beds during the midnight wake to encourage health and fertility. The sense of nature's rebirth was woven even into the fragile rhythms of biphasic sleep. For the nobility, spring brought different patterns. While castles grew warmer and daily affairs busier, lords and ladies still kept their two-phase sleep, but often shifted the midnight pause into social hours. Small feasts, private music, or the reading of romances might fill the gap between sleeps, with household musicians playing soft tunes as servants tended the hearth. In their great halls, the boundary between wake and sleep blurred with a kind of easy luxury. The sense of security in noble houses did not erase anxiety. In fact, spring was often the start of new rivalries, land disputes, or preparations for summer campaigns. The waking pause gave aristocrats time to plot, discreetly making use of the quiet when fewer ears listened. The biphasic rhythm was as valuable to their strategies as it was to a peasant's peace of mind. Across all classes, spring confirmed that biphasic sleep was no accident, no mistake of poorly lit times, but rather a wise accommodation of human needs to nature's shifting calendar. Modern researchers see in these practices a kind of quiet genius, the medieval mind, adapting its body to the seasons rather than fighting them. As second sleep returned before the cock's crow villagers across Europe folded themselves into rest, carrying a sense of the earth's promise. The new leaves unfurled, birds stirred in hedgerows, and a tender hope threaded through every sleeping heart. With summer's arrival, the medieval cycle of biphasic sleep faced its greatest test. In many regions of Europe, darkness grew so brief that it seemed hardly worth surrendering to sleep at all. The sun might slip beneath the horizon for only a few hours before rising again, in a pink blaze, leaving people to adapt their age-old rhythms to these near-endless days. First sleep in summer came late. Work stretched long under mild evenings, tending animals, harvesting early crops, repairing roofs or fences. The scent of grass and warm earth clung to people as they lay down, often only after a quick wash in a wooden tub or a dip in a stream. Exhaustion still demanded rest, but it was a rest shortened by nature's bright tyranny. The pause between sleeps persisted, but shrank. In these brief summer nights, a family might wake for less than an hour. A parent could slip outside to check the animals or watch for bandits traveling under cover of darkness. A child might be comforted after a frightening dream. Some historians still argue whether biphasic sleep truly operated in summer or shifted toward a single consolidated block. But the evidence suggests most people kept the habit, only compressing it. In noble houses, the pattern was even more flexible. A lord might host a private gathering well past sunset with lute players or a traveling poet to entertain guests. Once the first sleep began, household staff kept a quiet vigil, checking doors, ensuring no flame threatened the tapestries, and waiting for the hour when their master might wake to consult about harvest rents or small disputes. Second sleep in these settings was often shorter. A final nap before dawn returned with its demands. Fringe details from medieval letters tell of families using the night pause for summer rituals. In parts of Italy, people carried rosemary sprigs through the household, between sleeps blessing each doorway against summer fevers. In the Baltic regions, a cup of honeyed water was drunk, in the pause believed to guard against night spirits and heat stroke. These customs, strange to modern ears, made perfect sense to communities where disease and misfortune were only ever a short step away. Summer dreams shifted as well. Instead of the slow, heavy visions of winter second, sleep dreams in summer were bright, quick, and often full of movement, chasing animals, crossing fields, dancing at a festival. These dreams, shaped by the season's pace, were believed to warn of storms bless a child's growth, or even predict how generous the next harvest might be. Scholars today marvel at how this flexible biphasic pattern, even when squeezed by short nights, preserved its structure. Humans seem wired to accept waking moments in the night, whether winter's long hours or summer's blink and you miss it darkness. That adaptability may be the greatest triumph of medieval sleep culture. Rather than demanding perfection from their rest, people found a way to let sleep follow the world's pulse. And so, as the second sleep drifted to its gentle end, the medieval household stirred again, a baby crying softly, a dog shifting near the hearth, someone stoking a morning fire. The summer dawn called them all into another cycle of labor and hope, woven seamlessly from the night's divided hours. Beyond the ordinary rhythms of medieval homes, biphasic sleep also left its mark on medicine and healing. Throughout Europe, folk healers, herbalists, and even the formally trained physicians of cathedral schools observed how the night's pause affected the body. They believed that the space between first and second sleep could be used to treat illness more effectively, and they built entire systems of care around those precious middle-of-the-night hours. The logic was simple. After first sleep, the patient's body was thought to have partially renewed its strength, but not yet fully relaxed into the deepest part of rest. In this liminal state, herbal infusions, ointments, or prayers were believed to work best carried deeper into the patient's system. Some historians still argue whether this was true medical wisdom or superstition, but medieval casebooks reveal how common it was to time treatments for that wakeful moment. A healer might brew a tea of valerian or lavender to calm the nerves and ease the second sleep, or they might mix a poultice for a swollen joint applied while the patient was awake and then left to work during the final hours of rest. In cathedral schools, physicians debated these practices, weighing them against inherited knowledge from Roman texts and new observations gathered in monasteries. One interesting fringe detail comes from a manuscript in 13th century Salerno, where a physician recorded applying leeches after first sleep, believing the blood would flow more evenly in the night pause. It sounds grim today, but in an age with no antibiotics, any theory that might help heal infection was welcome. Spiritual healing also flourished in these hours. Priests or monks would arrive at a bedside with candles and psalms, offering absolution or blessings after the first sleep. Medieval people viewed sickness as not just a physical condition, but a spiritual challenge. The night so close to death in its hush seemed an appropriate moment to face one's fears and call upon higher powers. These rituals were not performed alone. Even the smallest peasant cottage might see neighbors slip in after the midnight pause to help. A woman might hold a candle, a man might offer warm broth, children might gather herbs. This communal presence, softly organized around Biphasic sleep, gave the ill person a sense of belonging and comfort that modern medicine sometimes struggles to replicate. Nobles, of course, had access to more advanced remedies. Their second sleep was guarded by watchful servants, while apothecaries prepared expensive salves of rose oil honey and exotic spices. During the pause, a lady of the house might consult an astrologer to determine whether a cure was best applied before or after the second sleep. Belief in planetary influence was woven tightly into medieval medical theory, and no treatment schedule was complete without its approval. In the end, this nighttime healing culture revealed how medieval society viewed rest itself. Sleep was never wasted time. It was a resource to be divided, shaped, and sometimes strategically interrupted to save a life. The medieval mind saw a kind of grace in this, a moment between two sleeps where the world seemed suspended, perfectly suited to healing prayer and the quiet hope of recovery. As the candles burned low and the family gathered once more for second sleep, the household exhaled its worry. Whether through herb or prayer or simply warm human presence, the night had offered its gentle care, and the medieval rhythm, proven across centuries, carried them onward toward dawn. With the memory of night healings and whispered prayers still fresh, medieval Europe's biphasic sleep culture also revealed how profoundly the rhythms of work and social order were shaped by this pattern. First sleep, midnight pause, and second sleep acted like invisible gears, regulating labor from the highest lord to the humblest plowman. As evening fell, the work of the day slowly wound down. In farms and fields, tools were put away, animals bedded down, and fires banked. After the first sleep, the household would rise and use the pause for tasks that benefited from quiet and calm. Bakers began preparing dough to be ready for baking by dawn. Millers checked water wheels or turned stones, so they'd be ready to grind at first light. Midwives might be summoned in these hours, helping a woman through labor while the village slept. This midnight hour created a hidden shift, a social mechanism that divided effort and eased pressure on the crowded daytime. Some historians still argue whether this division was consciously planned or naturally evolved, but there is no question it became deeply woven into the economic fabric of medieval communities. Noble households followed the same flow, though with a more elegant flavor. Servants might use the night break to polish armor, mend fine garments, or update their ledgers, all under candlelight. Lords sometimes called private councils between sleeps, seeking quiet to debate taxes or alliances without the clamor of daily court. Even local judges occasionally heard sensitive testimony in the night hours, trusting the hush of the household to protect reputations. One fringe detail emerges from 14th century London, where records show a system of night watchers who patrolled the city precisely during the biphasic pause, when citizens were up and alert enough to raise alarm if thieves or fires threatened. These night watchers coordinated with householders' own waking patterns, a civic adaptation that historians today find remarkably sophisticated. Among peasants, the midnight break also offered a rare chance for sociability. A neighbor might slip by to borrow a pinch of salt, or ask advice about a cow in labor. Children might whisper stories by the embers guarded by sleepy parents. In that small starlit window, the rigid hierarchies of daytime relaxed. A village's network of mutual care came to life, as if darkness invited a gentler equality. Laborers who rose for the pause sometimes worked with surprising energy. Experimental studies on segmented sleep in modern volunteers suggest their bodies fell naturally into a refreshed, alert state between sleep phases. Medieval sources seem to confirm this. People described feeling unburdened after first sleep, ready to plan repair or simply think more clearly before drifting off again. In this way, biphasic sleep did more than guard rest. It regulated work-smoothed social tensions and allowed tasks to be shared across hours in a world where daylight was precious. Medieval folk knew every minute counted. Sleep wisely divided became a secret tool to stretch those minutes further. When the final embers dimmed and second sleep returned, each person carried into those hours a sense of accomplishment. Small chores completed, worries eased, neighbors reassured. Dawn would find them not only rested, but already one step ahead. And that subtle advantage night after night helped medieval Europe thrive. While biphasic sleep supported medieval society's patterns of work and healing, it also shaped the culture's understanding of safety and defense. In a world where bandits, wolves, or even rival lords might threaten after dusk, the pause between sleeps gave communities a vital window of vigilance. First sleep offered profound rest, allowing a weary body to recover from labor or travel. But after those initial hours, households naturally entered a lighter waking phase. In this pause, fathers might check that doors were latched and fences secure. Older sons could scout the paths around a village looking for torchlight or fresh tracks in the mud. Mothers soothed babies, but their ears stayed open for sounds beyond the cottage walls. This break in sleep effectively acted as a medieval night watch. Some historians still argue whether people intended it as a conscious defense or simply took advantage of natural wakefulness. But chronicles note how often night raiders or prowling animals were spotted during this time. That small period of alertness, placed precisely in the midnight hours, made it harder for thieves or predators to strike without notice. Castles and manor houses also used the biphasic rhythm to their advantage. Guards rotated shifts to match the sleeping cycles of those inside, doubling patrols around midnight, when residents were more likely to be lightly awake and able to respond to alarms. Lanterns were topped up, weapon racks checked, gate chains tightened, all in the hush between first and second sleep. Some fringe details of medieval defense even emerged in these hours. In parts of Eastern Europe, villagers hung bells on barn doors, designed to jingle if an intruder passed by while they were in their waking pause. In Scandinavian settlements, iron charms were nailed above thresholds between sleeps believed to frighten away trolls or malevolent spirits. The role of the church overlapped with these concerns. Priests reminded villagers to sprinkle holy water around entryways after first sleep, reinforcing the household's protection against evil. Psalms were spoken softly while walking the perimeter of a field or stable, turning that short period of wakefulness into a form of spiritual sentry duty. Modern researchers studying how sleep fragments in today's anxious society have noted that medieval people may have had a healthier relationship with night fears precisely because they expected to wake up. By integrating the pause into their sense of security, they turned the night from an unbroken darkness of dread into a series of manageable, hopeful intervals. In noble homes where intrigue might lurk as surely as wolves did outside peasant walls, the pause between sleeps carried a subtle political function. Courtiers might deliver a secret message or share a rumor while the lord stirred from first sleep, taking advantage of the quiet hour before rival ears awoke. The household's rhythm became a chessboard, its pieces moved carefully under the flicker of candlelight. By the time second sleep claimed them again, medieval people could lie down with a calmer heart, knowing they had done what they could to protect themselves and their loved ones. As dawn approached, the sense of safety created in those small, deliberate waking rituals stayed with them, a gift of peace carried forward into a new day. As medieval Europe evolved, the biphasic sleep pattern continued to adapt, alongside new inventions, beliefs, and changing ways of life. Even as towns grew larger and trade networks expanded, people held on to the comforting rhythm of first sleep, midnight pause, and second sleep, proof of its remarkable staying power. One reason biphasic sleep endured was its deep cultural acceptance. Children were raised from birth into this pattern, observing parents who banked fires after first sleep or prayed during the night pause. Even after a long day of working in fields or workshops, the moment between sleeps was woven into family life. Stories were told, worries were eased, and neighbors still felt welcome to knock at the door. Some historians still argue whether biphasic sleep was better than our modern 8-hour block, but the resilience of the medieval pattern speaks volumes. In a world without electric lights, it aligned perfectly with human circadian rhythms, letting people share dark hours with a sense of control and even community. In the later medieval centuries, towns introduced curfews with more consistent public watchmen and church bells to mark safe hours for sleep. Yet even these regulations respected the night's pause. Bakers, millers, guards, and midwives still operated in those precious hours. Travelers crossing Europe's roads planned journeys with the biphasic pattern in mind, resting in roadside inns where second sleep could be finished in relative safety before dawn. A fringe detail appears in travel accounts of the 15th century, noting that some inns charged a double rate if guests wanted a second wake-up call for after first sleep, proving how widely known and accepted the pattern remained. Meanwhile, nobles and merchants began to tie the night break to an emerging culture of record-keeping. Account books, contracts, and even love letters were drafted during the hush between sleeps when fewer distractions allowed for careful words. In this way, the pause supported not only survival and prayer, but also the administrative backbone of growing economies. Religious practice, too, found a lasting ally in biphasic sleep. Monastic orders continued to ring bells through the night for centuries, confident that even lay people were accustomed to hearing them while half-awake. Some villagers found comfort in these distant chimes, reminders that prayers were rising all through the night, connecting lonely hearts across valleys and towns. By the time the first hints of modernity arrived, with clocks and street lamps beginning to push back, the centuries-old dance of divided sleep slowly faced its sunset. But its echoes remain. Modern sleep research confirms how natural segmented sleep can be, and experiments show that people placed in darkness without electric lighting quickly return to a two-sleep rhythm. Perhaps medieval villagers understood something we have lost. That sleep is not just a surrender, but a way to shape our nights with intention, community, and gentle wisdom. The final hours of second sleep carried them to dawn with steady hearts, confident they had met the night on their own terms. And so, through countless winters, bright springs, short summer nights, and the first chills of autumn, the people of medieval Europe made peace with darkness. They split it, blessed it, and built their lives within its rhythm, finding there a kind of quiet power that still whispers to us across the centuries. And now, listener, let these images settle with you. Picture the humble peasant stirring from first sleep to stoke the hearth, checking on his family, then laying down once more with a sense of calm. Picture the lady of the manor, wrapped in soft wool, quietly reading a prayer by candlelight before closing her eyes for second sleep. See the guards who patrolled walls, see the midwives who stood ready, and the children who dreamed safely beside a parent. In these divided nights, medieval people found not fear, but trust. They trusted that darkness could be broken into manageable pieces. They trusted their neighbors, their prayers, their routines. In that small space between two sleeps, they nurtured hope, resilience, and a shared sense of belonging. Perhaps we too might borrow something from their ancient rhythm. The grace of a pause, the calm of a well-lit hearth, the freedom to let dreams come and go without forcing them to obey a perfect schedule. Sleep in the medieval imagination was not an enemy to be conquered, but a companion to be guided through each season's challenge. As you rest tonight, carry with you this gentler thought: your sleep need not be flawless, but only kind. You, like they did, might find peace in the hush, courage in a pause, and relief that dawn will always return. Rest now. Let your mind drift. Let the hours stretch as they will, trusting that you will wake with the strength you need.